All right. Hi, folks. We're here. If you've got questions on your mind about the roadmap or things you want to put on our radar, we would absolutely love to hear about them or tell you what we're thinking.
The thing I haven't asked in Slack, but came up as you were talking, was that given the way that your growth is happening with new customers and that informing your plans, how do you also think about that in terms of retaining people who have been here? Because there's obviously very different needs from user group perspective.
Yep. I was just talking with Jeremy, our PM for the core team, about this morning. And it's one of those things where the surest way to do a bad job is to not acknowledge it. And it's the realization that at the end of the year, like half the people that use DBT are not yet using it. And I think it puts us in a pretty challenging spot. And I can tell you as the head of product, it means that it's pretty hard to create focus because we don't want to pick. We don't want to say, no, we're going to ignore the new people. We definitely don't want to say we want to ignore the people that have been around for years. All of it means that we have to do everything. And so I think the thing I'd point to is just we're data-minded folks. We've seen 10% month-over-month growth for a while, and we've extrapolated that out in the future. And it was a big part of us raising Series A and B last year. We needed to come to grips with the growth in DBT out in the world and make sure that we have a team that can support that growth for folks old and new. I always think about the Girl Scouts or Brownies saying, it's make new friends, but keep the old. One is silver, the other's gold. So we want to do our best to try to make everyone happy, but that's the high level. Yeah, thinking.
Also, we have till 1:30.
We have until 1:30. There's no agenda here beyond the things on your mind. So feel free to speak up. You can drop a question in the Slack chat or in the Zoom chat, and we'll take it from there.
Okay, Drew, I got a random one. I'm really excited about the build function. Do you envision that staying to be like a linear, like seed, run, test?
Yeah, I think that we'll probably preserve those capabilities so as to not break every existing DBT project out there in the world. The goal would be more that you select the things that you want to run, and then whether they're seeds or snapshots or tests, they all run in one super DAG. Like funny things happen right now where if you have a DBT run step and a DBT test step, you're going to end up running tests on the models that failed in the previous step because DBT can't tie those things together. It'd be much better if there was a workflow where tests and models and everything else participate in the same DAG and you can intelligently run things over the course of a whole run.
Yeah, that's a really cool idea. I was chatting with someone about interleaving tests with your runs. That's a really cool idea.
So one of the things we could consider doing there is if a test if a test fails, we could skip running the models that are children of that model whose test failed. And that's interesting. And like maybe sometimes it's desirable, but maybe it's not always desirable. So I think ultimately it'll come down to like the controls that we provide to folks. And again, like we'd want to come up with sensible defaults and then also give you the ability to say, no, this test is super important. If this test fails, don't run anything downstream of this. It's like a critical issue and we need to respond to it.
Metadata.
Yeah.
First question, what is qualified or counted as metadata in the DBT worldview?
So what is metadata? It's a bit of a meta question because I think it's evolving for us too in terms of what is the scope of the information that we want, but we view it as what information about the data sets is most useful for these values that we talked about. How do you empower the analytics organization? How do you have insight into data quality and observability? And so that could be a really wide range from like freshness of sources to like a more historical lens on how data is evolving over time. I don't know if you're looking for something specific, but it's data about the data and information.
Yeah, I didn't have any particular place, but I wanted to know where to start for any follow-up questions. So my first one would be talking about it as an analytics community or data engineering community. But one of the biggest issues, especially when you're in like a SOX compliant environment, is the non-technical users. So how do you surface that information to people who have no idea what the database looks like, don't want to know, but need to have a sense of what is true and what is not, and unified definitions and all that data governance?
Yeah, so completely aligned on that front. I think I guess it depends on your definition of technical user and who's consuming data within the organization. Like who's making the decisions where those endpoints are touching. And one of the things that we talked about was the importance of it surfacing in workflows, even if you're not the analytics engineer and data builder mode. I think it could go either way in terms of like consumer of a dashboard having information to data, but you can imagine that in a variety of other applications where it's not always like the analytics engineer who's the final consumer of the data. So completely aligned there.
Just not a question, but to keep your mind closer to where I am, like an analytics engineer is absolutely not the last person in this chain. Like I got to get to the lawyer and I got to get to the account exec and the sales rep and that kind of thing.
So,
yeah.
Allison, sorry, Martin, have you seen the integration that we have with Mode Analytics around?
No, I would never touch Mode. Looker all the way.
To each their own. Can I share my screen for a moment? It's less about this particular integration and more about the sort of ethos here. So when we say we have this tenet of meet you where you are, showing source data last refreshed 14 hours ago in the report is a really powerful thing. We could absolutely, and we do surface this information inside of dbt Cloud, but the reality is it's an unreasonable expectation to ask someone who's looking at a Looker report or a Mode report to open dbt Cloud and look up how recent is this data. So it's like, okay, figure out ways to push that metadata where the people are. And that will take different shapes over the course of time, but this is like a realization of it. Do you buy that?
I'm thinking for very different use cases than you're thinking of. So I'm going to type in the chat so I don't take up more space.
Okay. We'd love to hear about it.
But the use cases are they are useful. We want to hear them. So we're not trying to say, no, here's a Mode integration that solves everything. I think we're really in line that the idea is not everyone in the organization is a data expert, and data that's being used in the org, like we should have high confidence and trust in that data. And so some of that means surfacing the information on the BI layer, and some of it is other applications, whether related to privacy or some of the ones that you're going to write out. So we appreciate that.
Okay. Oh, I saw a question in the Slack chat that has disappeared. Eric, is column level lineage something that's being contemplated on the roadmap? I get that it's significantly more complex than model level lineage. Would be a killer feature to add for observability and interpretability. I really agree with you. Is the question, is it being contemplated? The answer is yes. Is the question, are we building it right now? The answer is like actually a little. Our next release of dbt Core is going to have our very first steps in this direction. This is a whole conversation. I'll give you the abbreviated version. It turns out that being able to statically analyze a model and pulling out its refs and source calls and configs is way faster than the thing that dbt used to do, which was actually like templating out that model through Jinja, the templating engine. We wanted to make that process faster, and we also thought, gosh, there's a lot of ways that having a proper parser for this flavor of dbt SQL would empower things like column level lineage in the future and more, including when I talked about IntelliSense or dev tooling, it's also the same thing. It's like, how much can we know about the thing that your cursor is hovering on top of? We're still early in this process, but like we've written a parser generator for the Jinja parts of some of the Jinja parts that dbt works with. And we think that's a little bit of a nucleation site that we'll be able to grow this capability on top of over time. Of course, building a validating cross-database SQL parser is its own challenge, but I think that's one that we're excited about, not maybe a little fearful of, but mostly excited about. I'll also say anything like that we do, like that is such an open source, it's such a good type of project to open source and collaborate around. Like we don't want to build database SQL parser generators for every database in the world. We want to create a framework and help folks contribute and collaborate. Cool. Any thoughts on column level lineage beyond yes, let's do it? That's where I'm at.
As we look at things in our organization, like that's one of our killer features. We're an insurance company. We're in a pretty highly regulated industry. Some of the areas that we're particularly looking at are things like disparate impact. Exactly how did you get to this to variable X right? Is this potentially a discriminatory? Have you inadvertently trained a model to become really racist? How have you been able to positively demonstrate that at the very least you've managed to not explicitly call things out? You're not explicitly segmenting based on race. You're not explicitly segmenting based on some other protected class. And column level lineage is a great way to do that, because while we're not evil, it's really easy to just put the evil hat on and then just change race to factor X and then off you go.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I think, yeah, the two broad use cases we're thinking about around column level lineage are definitely dev tooling. So if I'm looking at a model, where did this data come from? And the other one is really like governance, compliance. Is this column allowed to be in this table in this format? I think we're very much in the researching phase at this point. So I think we're going to try to understand other types of use cases and things we can design for and make sure that whatever we build is going to be able to address all of those different challenges. Now, I will say, I wasn't planning on doing this, so I don't have everything I would need set up, unless maybe Teresa. Yeah. All right. I feel like the president of the United States has that authority to declassify anything at will. And I feel like I'm vested with such an authority too. So I'm just going to give you the quickest of teasers here. And of course, this is being recorded. So actually, whatever. This is where we're at. This is super simplistic. It does not implement every part of SQL that we would need. Very much a proof of concept. We're going to throw this away and do it differently. And I would make a better demo if I was planning on showing this off. But you can see on the left here is the SQL statement. On the right is what's called an abstract syntax tree of this query. And so if we put our cursor on from accounts, you see it's an identifier that's part of a quoted identifier, that's part of a table reference and the data set definition. And this tool we use is called tree sitter. It's pretty cool. This is an example of like syntax highlighting. So here I say highlight any aggregate function in blue, which is what's happening. So there will be a lot more to come in that in the future. I don't want to show you this and make you think like it's ready for prime time in any way. We're pretty early, but excited about it.
That's definitely exciting. I'm pumped. That is cool.
Cool. Okay. When we open this up to the world, I'll be excited to see some pull requests, or at least hear your thoughts.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Okay. How much do data warehouse usage patterns influence the dbt roadmap? Is there a prevalence of DB usage that you can share? That's really interesting, this question about data warehouse usage. We do have information about the warehouses that folks are using with dbt and how that's changing over time. We do not currently publish that, and though I would have the ability to share it with you, we're just not in the habit of kind of publicizing it. I think this is going to be really interesting, and there's probably a whole conversation we could have about the broader industry and what players like, just say Databricks or Firebolt mean for the sort of old guard of Snowflake, BigQuery, Redshift. Put Materialize in that camp too. We're excited that Materialize has released a dbt integration from the start. I think we're actually able to get things on the roadmap that helps make the analytics engineering workflow more addressable in Materialize. So I think this is real and a little bit bi-directional. And my hope is that when we say dbt has gravity, I'd be excited about what we're data warehouse providers designed for people doing analytics engineering on those data warehouses. Any thoughts, questions? It's a great question.
I just like hearing you talk, Drew.
Me?
I can feel it. I don't need any direction. It's like writing code and hearing you wax in the background.
Cool.
One question.
Yeah.
Do you have any plans to widen your product offering in terms of maybe a data catalog or some other solution that are not entirely transformation, or are you focused on like making the best of what is today?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Definitely. I don't know if you have more to add there.
Yeah, dbt participates in this really broad ecosystem. And Allison, this is almost one of the things I was thinking when I first saw your message earlier today. The way we're approaching this in general, at least with metadata, is API first. And so if you're already using sort of data catalog tool, we want you to be able to take that data out of dbt and put it into the data catalog tool that you use. There's a lot of data catalogs. They all, have different, they'll work a little bit differently. They're all good at different kinds of things. Fair enough. I'll just say we have this dbt kind of auto-generated docs website. It's a little bit more of a data dictionary than a full-on data catalog. I think that ultimately we're going to continue to be very happy to integrate with other kind of data catalog players in the space. If we make developments on our end at the same time, it would only be because like it's a tighter and more deeply integrated experience overall.
Yeah, I've been working with a lot of data catalogs, but no one does really work. So I think DBT, as it is today, is a data catalog light that works at least. So making it a little bit better, I think would benefit many people. But thanks.
Good question. Or no?
No, I'm seeing some conversation in the chat. No data catalog meets all needs. The space is so all over the place. Actually, I don't want to take us too down this path, but I think two of you just flagged this, that you're using data catalogs, that you would like to see more from them. And since part of staging is hearing more of that, either in the chat or now, would love to hear more on what you're missing in data cataloging today.
Basically, they all demand a lot of the users as it is now. I haven't tried all the latest, but from experience, DBT works because it's connected with the code. So you can see how all the transformation is done. Sometimes the documentation or what you write in the descriptions aren't up to date, but you can always see in the code what's really happened. And it all takes a lot of maintenance.
Yeah.
That's a bigger problem.
And I saw what you wrote here, which is essentially like those who are not data savvy being able to contribute to the metadata feedback loop. I paraphrased it, but that was if I understood correctly. If you're consuming the data and you see something is wrong or off, do you have any way to actually feed back to this knowledge that everyone has? And right now that's tough to do.
Yeah.
A controversial question. One of our sort of key viewpoints is you got to meet people where they are with the metadata. Does that mean that actually building a data catalog is not the right thing and it actually looks different?
If you build it right to solve pain and you have the API layer, I think that's the golden nirvana.
And I think the real challenge is that often you start your project with, we're going to build the most amazing data catalog thing, but many organizations have probably just getting the data they want or have access to data. So you have to take it step by step. And I think DBT as it is today with the documentation side is a great first step. And it would be great to have a way to take the next step. And the data catalog solutions today are more like when you are 5 years in your analytics project, maybe you can start using a data catalog. But today, the big problem today is just to get your hands on the data, more or less. And that's what DBT solves.
Yeah. Okay. I buy that. We're going to be deep in this headspace, I think, in at least the researching phase. So it'd be cool to get together and talk about these things and what would be really helpful. And I think the last thing we want to do is try to build a data catalog in a vacuum, put it out in the world and like cross our fingers. I think there's a lot of folks in the DBT community with really good opinions. And what's so funny, we've been collaborating for like years. I actually don't know how to say your name. Is it Mikhail or Michael?
It's Michael.
Michael, okay.
Yeah.
Michael, it's been like years. It's actually, I don't know that I've seen your face before.
I built a DBT SQL Server adapter. That's why.
So it's cool. I'd like to maybe get together, talk about metadata. Maybe we can do that as a group sometime. You know, maybe the one other thing I'd throw out is if you're trying to build a general purpose data catalog and you have no assurances about the underlying data, it's a lot that you need to build into that data catalog to map over the fact that the data is chaos. But I think that if you have guarantees that like DBT is in the mix and the data is modeled and tested and you know where the source code is, I think that actually means that the resulting data catalog can do like a little bit less because it's not trying to be a shim for like data modeling and metrics definition at the same time. It's really more, here is what exists in the data warehouse. Here's how you query it. Here's what you need to know. So that's maybe one of the things we're thinking about. Like, what would you do differently if you assume that the data is perfectly modeled versus if you have no guarantees about the underlying data?
Yeah, I mean, the data will always change. Even if it's perfectly modeled, it will always change. And the data catalog has to reflect that. And the only way to make that happen is to connect it with the code that changed the data.
When you're working in a world where the underlying data lives across S3 buckets and HDFS and different file formats emitted by different tools, like it can be really hard. Like the data catalog is very disconnected from the generation of that data. But in a world where things are more front and center in the warehouse and transformations applied to that data in SQL primarily, it does just simplify this idea of lineage or provenance. Like they came into the warehouse via Fivetran and the source was Salesforce. There are going to be cases where it's a lot more complicated than that, but I think that increasingly the data warehouse is the place where the data lands first, and that's exciting. Okay, we're coming up on time. I appreciate y'all jumping in. I appreciate the kind things some of you said about what it sounds like to hear me talk about data. Barr, thanks for coming along. And even if this session's over, we're still going to be in Slack. We'd still love to hear from you. So this is a great conversation about data catalogs. I would love to continue it. And Barr, I think we should.
Yeah, if anyone wants to join a data catalog, we can call it a working group or one-on-one. I'd be happy to chat with anyone here.
Well, thanks everyone. Hope you have a really good rest of your day.
Bye, take care.
Yeah.
Thanks, bye.